Dr. Cohen, you are a medical doctor and a specialist in health and longevity and the founder of Pure Clean Performance. So, welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to share with your listeners. Thanks, Richard.
Th- Thank you, Dr. Cohen. So, Dr. Cohen, could you provide a little background on yourself and what led you to form Pure Clean Performance?
Okay. So I got interested in health, and actually, it's a interesting story. I was sick one day. I think I was 15, and I was at my grandmother's house in Brooklyn. And somewhere in her bookshelf, she had something on the Hunzas and the Hunza population and just how they live their life and just sort of whole variety of different things. So I read about it and I actually ordered this book about it and it just intrigued me and just somehow that, wow, we can actually pay attention to what we do and perhaps live healthfully. Because I was impressed that my grandmother was 90 something and vibrant. She just got remarried at 92 and they went out dancing, so it was like that's cool.
Hmm.
That's cool. So she just had this vibrancy, and that led me into sort of pursuing health and fitness primarily
Hmm.
because that was um, I was a hockey player and a baseball player, and my background, I went to Duke in biomedical engineering. So my goal was to do engineering and tie that into sports science. Didn't quite go where I wanted to go. I think it was a bit before my time. I was planning to do an MD PhD. I wound up going to medical school and was going to do preventive medicine and health and public health. And I got an offer to work at a functional medicine clinic in Cambridge where they were going to pay me money as opposed to, we have to work for very little for a couple of years to get a PhD. So I took that and that led me down a functional medicine pathway.
Hmm.
And I was a functional medicine doctor from about 1990 to 2000. And in Boston at the time, I was sort of like, we were like the doctors of last resort, or the doctors where um, people came to because they didn't know what else to do, or they came to because someone brought them to them, and you had to sort of cajole people to make changes. Did that for about 10 years and got involved in actually testosterone. Had an idea where um, we could create this supplement that would naturally support testosterone. Now, this was before any testosterone was even aware. And so, doing work with Broda Barnes, the Broda Barnes Foundation, and they used to study Jacques Hertog and Terry Hertog out of Belgium, but his father was one of the sort of movements in this hormonal restoration. So I had a deep understanding of that over the years as a clinician, and I saw we have this population of no one's checking hormones. Like it wasn't a thing, as now it's like it's a big thing, but it was before its time. Um, so I said, we need to look at men's testosterone. So we started this. This was my foray into entrepreneurialism. As we started a company that was doing saliva hormone testing, and then we would lead them down a path of hormone restoration. We actually almost had two pharmaceutical companies interested in it. There's Watson, they were just coming out with the androgel and the testosterone patch because Viagra, like it's been around forever, but not really. It was only like 2001 that Viagra got released. So the idea that you can market to men at that time, it's 20 years, how much has changed? Something that would be good for their health, but didn't exist. So once Viagra came out, it opened up the market to say, oh, men's health, men's testosterone, erection problems are something we could deal with. It was a problem then. It's not like a global epidemic as it is now, getting worse. So
Hmm.
that led me into the entrepreneurial field. And I've had a variety of different companies over the years. We created a few products that really worked on educating people on the problem. They did quite well, so I actually gave up my practice and was just doing more research, and that's where I've been over the past 20 years. Pure Clean Performance sort of started And it's another interesting story. So my wife, we were living in Central Oregon, and my wife is a cyclist, high-end cyclist, mountain biker. My daughter is had that same sort of endurance, speed capability. So she was a track runner. This particular school had two generational runners. Erin was good, my daughter, but these two women, one could have been an Olympic 800 meter. She wound up burning out in college, and another one just was three state champions after a row, but they kept breaking down. They kept getting sick. Like they kept getting injuries. One kept getting stress fractures. And the coach and I got to talk about nutrition a bit. And he goes, I'm just like convinced that they're nutritionally depleted in some particular way. So we put together this little panel that were checking some key markers of health. And this was 2000, I'm trying to think, 2008 or so. So we found that across the board, the team was deficient in some key metabolic markers. They were so it awakened to me you could be physiologically fit. I'm sorry, you could be physically fit, but not physiologically fit. So we
Mhm.
got them making changes, and they started to do better. Like one of the girls, her thing was she only ate white food, so it was nothing with color. And nutrition was just not an issue. And it was mainly the girls, because the girls were also they had to stay thin, they had to stay lean. And in this school, there were 100 athletes on the team. So other than the top two, like superstars, you had that next tier of runners that they were sort of replaceable. So
Mhm.
if number four went down, there was number nine could come up. The coach at this school was actually aware of that. He was a really good guy. Some of the high school women's coaches were, it was all about winning. And if number four went down, they didn't really care. They would run them, and they overtrain them. That's a problem in high school. So that's a big issue that we spent a number of years dealing with. And my wife really guided my daughter to not um, over push herself, do too much endurance. So that led to this creation of a company that did home testing for athletes. And we could talk a lot about that in and of itself, but that got me into so within that company, we vetted nutritional supplements because we were doing testing omega-3 fatty acids, amino acids, hormone levels, vitamin D, bone turnover. This wasn't being done at the time. Again, if this is only 10 years ago or so, 10, 12 years ago, the ability to do home testing it was because of my experience as a functional physician that I knew the labs to work with. So they weren't commercially marketing this like they are now everywhere. Everyone has a test. It didn't exist, but they were out there. It was just, the common practicality and lack of awareness that you could do this. Like at the time, you needed a doctor's prescription, like LabCorp Quest were not doing. You couldn't just walk in. You couldn't get any time labs or direct labs. Again, only like 10, 12 years ago. So that led to a company who did testing, and it was pretty cool. And I met with the Boston Red Sox, the Arizona Diamondbacks. I went to Nike and ran testing on the NFL Combine. Um, so it's like the Florida Panthers. The guy who was most interested was actually I don't know where he's head coach now, but he was the head trainer for the Vancouver Sounders MLS team. He was open to it because the European teams at the time were testing. They were ahead of the curve. Actually, they were just doing HRV too. They were looking at recovery. So it was at the beginning of the technology, and he was one of the front runners, and I was one of the front runners on the clinician field. So moving forward on that, we vetted out supplements, and here's the challenge, which actually we can talk about later, is people loved the story of testing was interesting to people. And what we found is it was easy for them to test initially and to share that you could be missing things or you don't know what's important. And it's better now, but mostly they just wanted to take stuff. So at the end of the day, they would test. We would guide them. We'd tell them what they should be using or doing. And then they would just keep taking it and never really check in. to
Mm.
what was most important. So we found foundational nutrients. So it's like as we were just fighting this all the time and not making a lot of money because we were spending our time educating and they weren't retesting. So we flipped the narrative. It's okay, we're going to give foundational nutrients to people and we'll just test them periodically if they want. Um, we had a bunch of people doing this, and like I was finding that even though we were sending the test as part of their protocol, no one was sending the test back. Like we were sending reminders and email, and this is the time you could educate people and have access to them. And literally after a year, there was I think 500 people using the protocol. One person said, "Hey, what happened to our test?" And I said, "Well, we just stopped sending it because no one was sending it back." He goes, "Oh, okay." So it was an awareness of the
Mm.
challenge. So one of the products, which made me at the time say, "All right, you can't you can lead someone to water, right? But you
Mm.
can't make them drink." Right. So it's like I'll just flip it. I'm going to use my knowledge and we're just going to take the best of our nutritional products and sort of rebrand them and sort of share to people and just like give them what they want, but give them products of higher quality, the products that we've been using ourselves personally, the products that we were giving to some of the professional and higher end athletes. And that's what became Pure Clean Performance. It's modified over the years, but that's sort of a 20-year story. We're leaving out a lot of parts,
Mm.
but yeah,
Yeah.
so it's 20 years. Yeah. So we've been
Oh.
doing a lot of that. And, there was a foray in working at, my son was a college baseball player, and we worked with this. We've actually moved to Texas and worked with this pitching coach who at the time was sort of on cutting edge, but now all of his sort of disciples are sort of intermixed into the major league system. So it was all about function. And it was like we became friends. So he was a forethought. So he realized that pitchers were breaking down due to movement patterns. And if you didn't address these movement patterns, not only did they get injured, but they couldn't link up and to be kinetically strong. But then again, the corollary here, my son, extremely gifted muscular strength wise. Um, he had a severe weakness. Okay. His weakness was the small musculature. He was so strong for his size. His small musculature in his shoulder was never strong enough to keep the head of the humerus sort of intact. So it would wobble. So he would get shoulder problems, which then eventually led to elbow problems. His other weakness, and we've looked genetically, he has a sort of a semi-recessive connective tissue problem. And I know more now, and if I knew what I know now, probably could have helped him. But his connective tissue could not hold up to his strength, so he had multiple surgeries, both his shoulders, both hips, labral tears. So he broke down. He had the physical capabilities, he had the strength, he had hand-eye was off the charts, but his connective tissue,
Mm.
he couldn't continue after college. Um, in the same light for health, we can do a lot of things right, but if one thing is missed and it's overlooked or you're unaware of, that'll get you. And so that's sort of the
Mm.
moral of the story. But yeah, so Pure Clean Performance still exists, and it's a different market in the supplement field. So
Mhm.
now that, as you can sort of tell, and I always like doing something different.
Mhm.
It's to me as an engineer, it's like exciting to find a new path. And it's like if I can help carve out a new path, and if everyone follows, I'll go find something else. It's just more interesting. Yeah.
Right.
And um now the longevity space has sort of opened up, and that's really been more of a passion, and that's sort of lifespan
Mhm.
is to me one of the greater challenges, right? One of the greater puzzles that we can figure out. Healthspan, it's okay. So I've been doing that for a long time. It's not that it's easy, but I think if we really all sit down most of us know the things we need to do that are going to dramatically improve our function over the years. We just need to be careful about the thing that's going to kick our butt, right? The weak link in the chain. And that's the thing that people overlook. But after that, it's like, I don't know, the chance of making it as a male to 110 is really, really low.
Mhm.
Maybe we make it to 100 functionally. So my mission is, how do we get past 100? How do we live youthful longer? Because there's so much more we can do. And
Struggling to juggle end of year commitments and festive fun. Between work deadlines, family gatherings, and the endless gift hunt, maybe it's enough to make anyone want to hibernate until January. Do you want to remain focused and calm during the holiday season? Remember how our bodies sometimes go into fight or flight mode when things get intense. That's great for escaping a hungry bear, but not so good when it comes to navigating the holiday madness. That's where Bioptimizer's Stress Guardian comes in like your personal holiday friend. This unique blend of 14 adaptogenic herbs helps regulate your body's natural stress response, supporting both mental and physical well-being. To get a head start on your holiday stress, visit stressguardian.com/modern and use modern10 for 10% off your first order, which comes with a risk-free 365-day money-back guarantee. Let's enjoy a stress-free holiday season together, and thank you for your support. So one of the things that we do, and this is really a Healthspan thing, although I suspect like you need Healthspan to reach lifespan as well, is we're told we need to exercise, and like exercise is important, and also retaining muscle mass is important. So a couple of questions. So why is retaining muscle mass? Why is muscle mass so important?
I think there's three or four, main reasons that we can think about this. Obviously, from the Peter Attia school of thought, there's function, right? If we're not able to function, then we don't enjoy life. So I was just in Martinique and we did canyoneering on this river, which had rocks, and we had to rappel on the walls. It wasn't like full out canyoneering, but it was just hiking and balancing on one leg, and I'm 63 and fit. And so it wasn't very difficult. And I thought this was so much fun, right? It wasn't hard, but it was just like playing as a kid. It's like, I want to be able to do this in 20, 30 years. Like, why should I have to stop? And, looking at some people who are younger and heavier and having trouble, it's like, they're not going to be able to do that. So one, to
Mhm.
be able to do what you want to do. And that's
Mhm.
that's one of the things that I hear from people all the time. If you don't hold muscle, if you don't hold function, you're going to stop being able to do, whether it's playing the floor with your grandkids, right? Or getting up off the floor, or, in the town where I live, there's all these cyclists and they just love cycling. It's their passion. So they want to keep doing it as long as they can. Um, there's a mindset that I have to stop, but no, I don't think so. Right. I think if we do the right things. So
Mm.
the other piece to it is muscle is metabolism, right? So muscle, there's a lot of mitochondrial density, so it helps um, energy production for the body, right? So there's and it's a U-shaped curve, but we can. So that's the second piece. The third piece is it's a glucose sink,
Mm.
right? So the more muscle, you don't necessarily need insulin, but glucose can get stored as glycogen.
Mhm.
So maybe that extra glucose doesn't become fat storage, or if that extra glucose or the extra energy wastage, maybe we'll talk about that, goes into visceral fat, which is the inflammatory thing we all want to pay attention to. So someone put that away in their mind. Visceral fat, really bad. Muscle, really good. The more muscle, typically the less visceral fat you have. And then fourth, there's actually a piece where we're starting to understand that muscle has signaling capabilities. So there may be a piece that muscle controls some immune function as well. Oh, and then the fifth piece would be an amino acid storage sink. So 50% of the protein is stored in our body. Not that we ever want to get to this, but if you're sick at 80 years old, you have immune senescence and you're someone who gets a pneumonia that when you were 20 would have lasted 2 days and now you're 2 months. And I saw my father go through this. It's like he had a little bit more muscle, always active, and I think without that, he may not have recovered. So he lost a lot.
Mm,
If people who went through COVID were sick for a week, right? I had virus, I lost 10 pounds, right? Gained it back on. But if you were low to begin with and you didn't have that resilience or that storage when you went into this severe catabolic state, you may not make it out. So think of that muscle that you need to catabolize, you know, to address an illness, which is one of the things that are going to get us at some
mm,
point, right? Vascular disease, cancer, um, immune senescence. It's a protective, it's a little bit more of a shield of armor. So that's a good way to think of muscle. You know, I don't think I missed anything, but maybe probably did.
yeah. I mean, it protects you against falls, but that would kind of come into
Oh,
the
there you
number
go.
one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The get number one, right. That's probably the fourth thing is accident, right? But that's ties into falls as well. Correct.
Yeah. So is it just quantity, or is there a quality component of muscle as well that we need to be thinking about?
I think if we go back to those five sort of purposes or five or six purposes, I think we want both, right? We want to have sufficient muscle so we have a sink for glucose, but we also want muscle that's going to be functional. So it's I'm an analogy guy, so you can be, massively big bodybuilder who can't do anything, right? They're huge. They may not even be able to move a lot of weight. Go to a power lifter who's big, but not as sort of big, just super strong, and then go to a gymnast, right? Go to a 13-year-old Olympic gymnast who doesn't have a lot of muscle mass, but oh my God, right? They can do an iron cross.
Mm,
So I think there's both ends of that. We want to be strong. We want to be resilient. We want to have enough muscle that we have a reserve. But I think too much muscle also is requiring too much energy to
mm,
maintain, right? So it's right. It's like having this big house that you need to have lots of people, take care of. And from a metabolic point of view, maybe that's not a good thing, right? If you have to continue, if you take the mindset that we have only certain cell turnovers, if we
mm,
have only certain amount of heme turnover cycles, um, if we have to keep delivering oxygen with iron, which also causes mitochondrial stress, and the more we have to run this engine, um, the more wasted. It's like having a powerful car that maybe you don't floor all the time, right? It's one that you're driving consistently. So um, both.
right. So if we wanted to take a kind of inventory of where we are, how are we going to how are we going to measure? What are we going to look at? We're going to look at strength, we're going to look at muscle mass, grip strength, um, free fat mass. What should we look at to determine where we are?
Um, couple ways to think of that. We can start. Let's start with technology, right?
Hmm,
So there's a variety variety of technology. We could go as simple as a tape measure, right? No, we can go as simple as a photograph. Take a
hmm,
photograph of yourself now. Look at where you were when you were 28, right? Pretty clear of change in muscle status. So that's the most simple thing to do. The next step is a tape measure, bicep, chest, thigh, upper thigh. That's also a way to monitor and track. Moving up the scale, right, you can do a DEXA scan. Um, Problem with DEXA scans are they don't pull out skeletal muscle, right? So they actually have a component that is not skeletal muscle. So when you get a DEXA scan for muscle, it's not skeletal muscle. It's like total lean body mass. Um,
Mhm.
so that can have errors to it. There's two sort of gold standard is an MRI. You can actually do an MRI, and there's a reason to do MRI. MRI is not going to be something that is going to be good for the masses. At least it could be because you could get an MRI. Price of an MRI could be $150 if it were scaled out and centers had a lot of people running through it. The MRI gives you precise calculations of your muscle mass. But even more important, is sort of a side, when you look at muscle, you can see if you're becoming marbled. And this gets to the
Mm.
visceral fat. You can actually look at the MRI and see if fat is sort of taking over that muscle. And if we talk about what happens as we get older, why we're not stronger, we don't have muscle density. And we've looked at MRIs in high-end athletes who have no fat in it. They look just super lean. There's no fat in there versus someone who may look big. You just see lots of fat. And if you want to motivate someone, show them their MRI of their muscle. They look like a tenderloin, and it's motivating to change. The A new test that's coming on. I don't think it's not released commercially. Is by William Evans, who's sort of one of the fathers. I think he's the father of sarcopenia. He's at Duke and Berkeley. It's called deuterated creatinine. So there's a creatinine turnover. Most of the 98% of creatine, is stored in the muscle. Okay, creatine then becomes creatinine, and you can look at a 24-hour turnover. There's problems with that assessment. They realized if they used deuterated creatine, and gave it to people, they'd have a marker, and then they can measure a 24-hour urine, and you would see 99% correlation to how much skeletal muscle you can do. And at some point, it's under IRB, should be quite inexpensive. So you take this drink and you collect your urine, and you'll have an exact measure of your marker. Maybe less important for us, because I think we can be pretty close. It, much more important for studies, right? And when you're
Mm.
looking at lots of people, where a significance of 10% could throw off the whole, um, you know, result curve. I do like, though, for anyone doing anything, and we had talked about impedance testing, and I don't. It's typically, again, it can be more reliable, consistent as opposed to accurate. So it's more accurate than precise. If you do the test in the same way with the same
Mm.
hydration, the same time of day, you'll be able to see changes. That doesn't mean that change is precise to what you have. So ideally would be, if I'm working with someone, I coach some people at a higher end, but it's like get an MRI for a bunch of reasons. Let's see where you are and then correlate it to something that you can do at home. And clearly you'll know the difference. So that's from a muscle perspective. From a functional perspective,
Sorry, just can we go back?
yeah,
I had one question in that area.
yeah, good.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
when you were talking about DEXA, you said, okay, we got skeletal muscle and we've got other muscle, right? Which is, I
that's
guess,
correct.
non-skeletal.
Within
Uh,
the Mhm.
yeah, I had not heard of that kind of separation for DEXA, but now, yes, it makes sense. So could you talk about that a little bit more? I mean, like, what's the percentage? Is there any way you can tell? And is it like the skeletal muscle is more important than other muscle? Is that?
Within functional parameters, right? It's the skeletal muscle which is going to change. It's the skeletal muscle that we can build upon. There's some other calculations that look at arm and leg appendage, and
Hmm.
there's some ratios out there. People have looked at this every which way. So, we can go way deep in the weeds into that, or we can say
Hmm.
what's important. And, for the purpose of maintaining, what's the muscle that declines? It's the skeletal muscle. It's the one that doesn't get used. It's the one that we can really change. So knowing what skeletal muscle is and tracking it in some reliable way is important, especially if it's of concern.
Right.
Does that help?
Yeah. Okay. And then
Okay.
DEXA does not catch marbling. Is that basically correct?
Yes, it does not. That's correct. It will give us visceral fat, and that's reasonably reliable enough. You can see changes with that. The best is again the MRI, where you can
Right.
look at the marbling in the muscle. You can look at the fat, the hepatosteatosis in the liver.
Mm.
You can look at the visceral fat around the organs. So that's and then you can also topic for another conversation. You can actually assess with a an algorithm of software iron in the liver,
Right.
and we're trying to work on iron in the spleen because iron in the liver and spleen do not correlate well to serum markers directly. So that's a whole nother fascination. If
Okay.
iron is really high, you'll see it high, but a good MRI, is a powerful tool if you're using all the pieces and looking at what's most important. Most of the MRIs now, they're looking more for cancer, which is
Mm.
good, where you're doing a full body MRI, but we really want to look for function and for these pieces, and I'll bring this up, like to me, it's mitochondrial function. Mitochondrial function. It's the most important thing that we need to
Mm.
optimize. What are signs of good mitochondrial function? Good mass, low visceral fat, no iron in the liver, no hepatosteatosis. You know, if you have those things on a picture of MRI, that's a strong sign that everything's going right for you.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted
Yeah.
you. Function.
Yeah, no. Function. Um, function is so there's three things, and and I'll refer to what Peter talks about. There's function, right?
Mm.
Function in the regard to function. Can you stay in a squat, right? Can you hang from a bar? Can you do a deadlift with your a certain amount of weight so many times? Can you do a farmer's carry, right? Are you able to lift something over your head? So that's function. So we also pick, can you balance? So when people think of muscle, I'm going to go to the gym and lift a certain amount of weight and redo it. But if you don't move, that's not going to stop you from a fall, right? So we
Mm.
go back to what we said before, the gymnast versus the bodybuilder who is huge can lift a lot of weight, or even the power lifter, but they probably can't bend to touch their toes, right?
Mm.
So we need to have a blend of that. So partly for the functional part, typically it's good to work with. There's some things you can do functional strength wise, and then there's functional movement. As we were talking, um, working with pitchers and baseball players, there's a lot of dysfunction. And by doing a screen, such as some of the things that knees over toes, Kelly Starrett is another good guy. There's functional movement screen by Gray Cook. So knowing if you're flexible, knowing how you move, and then if you're not, find someone to help you do that. Because
Mm.
if it's about Healthspan, and if it's about being able to walk on those rocks on the stream, if I had some dysfunction. I had a problem last year and my calf tightened up. I won't talk about it, but it's like I couldn't really walk for 4 or 5 months. I couldn't have done
Yeah.
that. And what if that maintained? It's like I couldn't do anything I want to do. I'm going to
Mm.
lose my muscle, I'm going to lose function, I'm going to lose my health.
Mhm.
So it not only stops you what you want to do, but it's the fork in the balloon that's going to destroy your health. And you see that a lot. So do not overlook function, because that drives people to decline in all ways. So that's important. And then the thing that we work, one of the I consult for a, a longevity company that does a lot of high-end screening in Healthspan, and work with some high-end clients in corporations, and they they see poor functional movement, and like people aren't aware of this, and that's it's really important. And the other thing is they start to lift, they go to the gym, they don't keep track of what they're doing. And coming from engineering, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So if you're going to be doing some strength training, you need a logbook, you need a piece of paper, you need to know that last Tuesday when you worked out, you did 2 sets, and on that second set, you did 10 reps. So today, if you did 9 reps, you got to ask yourself, why? What did I do? Am I overtrained? Did I not sleep? Why am I doing worse than I did last week? If you're training correctly, you should improve at least 1 rep a time, because that's the hormonic effect. Your body had a challenge, it got strong, it it whatever that challenge is, we could talk about some ways to trick that. It got stronger, it recovered, and you went back again,
Hmm.
and you could do a little bit more. And one of the clues for me, and it's interesting, is I have a leg and an upper body workout. I do biceps last. It's like there's five sets, 5 different exercises of upper body. I know if I'm either tired or a little bit overloaded for whatever reason, when I get to biceps, since it's a smaller muscle, I can work my way through lat rows. I can work my way through pull downs. I can work my way through bench presses, and I'll feel like, this may not be as good a day, but I'll always get one more on those. But when I get to biceps, and if something's off, I'll fail. Like, I'll fail by 2 or 3 reps. And it's like, okay, like, and I'll adjust on that. So that's my throttle marker. And it's funny, none of the leg workouts, but it's just the smaller muscle is the one to sort of, say, hey, something's not quite right. So you can't improve it. So please track, have something written it down. You can't just go to the gym and just throw some weights around and expect to get better and have a consistent gain. And if you want to know you're getting stronger, then that's a key. Have a functional marker. So I'll do, um, I stopped doing it, but, working your way up to a deadlift, a carry, right? And it's not part of the workout, but it's my last thing is I'll do a farmer's carry and 90 pounds in one arm, and I'll hold that. And I'm working to get up to 60 seconds again. I used to do that 5 or 6 years ago, but I'm close again. So I'd stop,
Mm.
I declined, but I'm coming right back up to it. So it's like, okay. And that I feel good that I'm not declining over time and actually improving over time. So there's your
Mhm.
strength piece to it.
Right. Okay. So I should have asked before, but if we were going to pick two or three of these things that you want to measure to kind of, so those are the general things that we're looking at. But if we want to pick
Yes.
something like for the DEXA scan, like what percentage does your lean mass want to be, or like how long do you want to do a hang, or so I guess just two or three metrics that people would want to be. What kind of target would we go for?
Visceral fat would be probably your biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
Visceral fat, ideally, you want under 1 pound, and that's a strong marker.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 pound visceral fat. Lean muscle, or skeletal muscle. There's so many different variations of that. I think it's going to be a percentage of. We're looking at, right. So fat-free mass.
Mm-hmm.
So you want fat percentage of 15%, 12 to 15, 12%. What your skeletal muscle is, off the top of my head, trying to think of that number. I can't think of it right now.
That's fine.
Yeah. Can't think of what your skeletal muscle is, but ultimately there's some ratios with your upper and leg, arm
Mm.
and leg measurements. I'm typically, the reason I can't think of it is I typically don't look at it. I
Right.
look at just where they are, where their visceral fat is, and then if we're doing an MRI, we'll get that number, and then we just improve it. Because the goal is where you are is where you are.
Mm-hmm.
The job is
Right.
just, can you maintain it or can you improve it? And then the challenge is, how much energy do you want to spend on improving it? You can't, we can't do it all. And I know it's a question we can talk about if you want a little bit in a little bit. It's like, how do you address these problems and what goes wrong and why people can't achieve what they want to achieve. So it's part of that piece. So you really need to focus. If you're going to be anabolic
Hmm.
as you get older, it requires a singular focus to achieve that.